Hello, you're listening to Sending the Experts with Georgina Durrant. This podcast is all about teaching and supporting children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, SEND. My name is Georgina Durrant. I'm the host of this podcast brought to you by Twinkle SEND. As a former teacher and SENCO myself, I wanted to create a platform to share some of the amazing things that my guests are doing to support learners with SEND. So whether you're listening on your commute, tuning in whilst walking your dog, or curled up on the sofa with a nice cup of coffee, thank you so much for joining us. In this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Sara Alston. Sara is a practicing SENCO, and as an independent SEND and safeguarding consultant and trainer, she provides support and training to schools for special educational needs and safeguarding. She is the author of The Inclusive Classroom, a new approach to differentiation, which came out in 2021, and Working Effectively with Your TA, which has just come out this month, which is February. Hi, Sara. It's lovely to meet you. How are you?
Great, thank you. And congratulations on your book.
Oh, thank you ever so much. So can you tell us a little bit more about yourself then? What's your experience in teaching and with special education needs, and what do you do at the moment?
So I'm been teaching a very long time because I'm very old. I'm in my 36th year of teaching, which is truly terrifying.
Inspirational, not terrifying.
Well, and I've worked mainly in primary schools, started with the Inner London Education Authority of Blessed Memory. I now teach and based in Surrey, and I'm an SENCO. And in that 36 years, I worked in primary schools, as I said. I worked in special needs units. I've done a range of teaching roles. I was an advisory teacher many years ago for history and geography. That feels in a previous lifetime. So you real range and a range of roles. Teachers led on virtually everything across the primary curriculum, apart from technology or music. And anybody who's met me knows why not. And in, I think, 2015, I was in a position for various reasons that I needed to look again at what I was doing. But what are the things I really feel passionate about in education? And actually, it's about inclusion, it's about safeguarding, it's about special needs. I thought, actually, I'm going to focus on doing that.
Brilliant.
I don't want to, I looked at the thing of, headship. I've been a deputy. I thought, no, that what I want to do is go this way. And I was incredibly lucky. Yeah. And I managed to set up my own companies, see inclusion and safeguarding. But also I managed to keep a part-time role in schools as a SENCO. And that has been really important because it means I'm not, as things have changed in schools, for example, in primary, all the changes in the teaching of phonics, I understand that, I'm part of it.
Yes.
But I'm also able to work across schools. And that includes, although I'm primary, it might be my experience in primary, had a year where I did a day a week in a secondary, which was an amazing experience. I'm so lucky at this point in my career to be able to do something really new. I think, can see how primary and secondary practice link and where they're different.
Yeah.
And I think that's been really important. So, I suppose the bottom line to what I do, I'm part-time SENCO, independent consultant. So I'm 2.5 days a week in school. Well, 2 days 1 week, 3 the other, because half days are. And then the remaining 8 days a week, I'm an independent consultant trainer.
Fantastic. That's wonderful. It sounds like you're still learning, like you say, going into everything, still learning and still, yeah.
If you're not learning, you're not going to be able to teach effectively.
Yeah.
People who say, I know it and learnt it, I think then you stop being able to travel with children on that journey.
Yeah. Because still open to new ideas and open to changes. Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And just one thing that we touched on just before our Zoom call, you're actually dyslexic yourself, is that right?
Yes, so I'm going back to why special needs, I suppose, is I'm have a diagnosis of dyslexia. I was diagnosed at 11 in the 70s. Nobody had ever heard of dyslexia.
Oh, wow.
I'd spent 11 years, 11 years of my life being told I was thick, lazy, or probably both. And my mum had a faith there was something else.
Brilliant.
That I wasn't thick, lazy. And she investigated. She was a teacher, became a special needs teacher.
Did she? Wow.
On the back of having, I'm one of 4 children, 3 out of 4 are dyslexic.
Wow.
And she was almost certainly dyslexic herself. And her faith, so I had this diagnosis. And for me, it gave me a word of why I found things more difficult.
Yeah.
And that gave me the courage and the strength to go on. But why do I do what I do? It's one of my earliest memories in school, spelling tests.
Oh, gosh.
And that we were asked to spell words aloud. If you got the word wrong, you had to stand in your chair.
Oh, my goodness.
Wrong, again, you stood on the desk. I was lapping people. The more I was asked to spell, the less I could. I mean, spelling words aloud is something I did. And I just remember it was just horrendous. And I talked to I was at school with who remember the horrendousness of the bullying and
that's just public humiliation, isn't it? For not
being
able to spell.
And I am just, I don't think I hope and believe that nobody would be doing that to a child now. But I don't want, I believe that we should be able, about us working with children as individuals, that whole recognising then, the needs, which may not be the same. Label may, we'll talk later about labels and the roles of them. But I think it is, for me, having a word to explain my difficulties. If I can go on, I don't want any child to feel the way I felt when I was leaving primary.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's horrible.
So I would like them to have the right support. And that's why. But it also means that I've learned an awful lot about how to adapt what I do. And particularly, I now earn a substantial portion of my living but through writing, which I've only been able to do because of the advances in technology.
Yeah.
Being able to use things like read aloud on Word.
Yeah.
And being able to, and it's being able to keep that abreast and think, how do we support children? How do we listen to what their needs are, and how do we support them to make the difference?
Absolutely. Gosh, I can see why it's driven you, having those experiences at primary school. And but your mum was a special needs teacher is awesome. She's been an inspiration as well to you.
One of the, I'll start waving the book. One of the honours and privileges of being able to write a book was being able to, in the acknowledgements, recognise and call out the female educators who inspired and supported me and believed in me when I didn't believe in myself.
Yeah. And
that includes my mum, but she's one of a list of people who met, and it was a real privilege to be able to name them.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So I'm going to actually give a special call out for 2 of our ongoing in practice, who are Helen Borley, who's an amazing head teacher of a school in Cardiff Bay, and Alison Walsh, who's the head teacher of a school in Frimley, both of whom, without clinical support, I would not be here.
Oh wow, brilliant!
Those are the continuing practices.
Yeah.
For the rest of the list, you'll have to look at the book.
Let's talk about your book then. So you've got 2 books now, but your first book, The Inclusive Classroom, you co-authored this with Daniel Sobel, and it's all about inclusion, obviously. Can you explain a bit more about the book and what inclusion means to you?
Yeah, so the book goes I keep saying it's in 2 halves. Halves implies equal portions, but 2 sections is better English. first bit is about our vision of inclusion, and particularly the role or non-role of educational labels. That the idea of inclusion being about making children, welcome, valued, that sense of belonging, sense of being valued, and being in a culture that responds to their needs, not necessarily their label.
Yeah.
And the second section of the book says, well, how do we do it? And what we do is we work through 5 phases of the lesson, because so much of, it's called a new approach to differentiation. And it's part of it is an attempt to reclaim the word differentiation. Differentiation, a lot of it's come to mean endless worksheets, layered work. What we're saying is fundamentally differentiation is about small tweaks and adaptations, and that needs to be ongoing throughout the lesson. We don't just drop in, differentiation in at the point when children are asked to do an activity. We need to think about the moment they come in, through the input and the instructions, through individual work, consider it looking at what it looked like in group work, and really importantly, the last 5 minutes of the lesson, which get the Cinderella of the lesson. It gets forgotten, and it's fascinating. You look at, you're going online or you're going to bookshops, there are lots and lots of books on lesson starters, engaging to, there is silence about that last 5 minutes.
Yeah,
and
a very good point.
And that last 5 minutes is we're trying to pack huge amount in. We're trying to finish the lesson. We're trying to evaluate what we'll learn. We're trying to get the children safely out and us safely out to the next place. But actually, that sets up the last 5 minutes of your lesson is the first 5 minutes of the next lesson, or whatever the child's next going on. And those transitions are so key. So I suppose that's what the book's about.
That's so interesting what you said about differentiation, because I remember my teacher training, it was you plan a lesson and then it was like an add-on. It was told, and then just make sure you've got differentiated worksheets, make sure you've got an extra one for some children and one for children who can manage this and can do a little bit more. And that was it. And that was all we had to do for differentiation. It's not enough, is it?
But it was all you had to do, and totally overwhelming. If you were being asked to, I mean, I remember being asked, differentiate every lesson 3 ways and don't forget. Differentiate. I mean, I always think back to, I taught for a long time in school where we had what would now be called a high coin unit, communication interaction needs. At that point, it was a unit to take children with disability, physical disabilities or autism, which didn't quite go together, but
no,
that was what the council did. With the result that in my class of 24, I had 8 children with statements, precursor EHCPs for autism, and a child with a wheelchair user. And, I had children in old money working from a level 1 to a level 4. It was a year 3 class. And trying to differentiate on up-team worksheets, virtually every child would have needed their own worksheet. It was insanity. So it had to be finding a way that worked, that actually wasn't that. It was looking at how did we, and I say we, because I was working with a large team of TAs in that classroom, clearly well, given the high level of need,
it was necessary.
It was necessary, but it was also created its own issues. But it was about finding a way to make it work.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because you're so right about the differentiation and how important it is to make it for the whole lesson and not just to think about this one sort of activity that you then, and the kids know as well. I used to find as well the kids, it was never a good approach for children. They know that they've been given the worksheet that's not the higher level one or whatever you want to call it, and it's not great for self-esteem and for children's view of themselves.
It also limits the children.
Completely.
We are saying you can only go here.
Yeah.
But actually, and one of the things I feel that, things that you put maths in primary is particularly, I mean, there are issues with setting in second, but maths in primary, you on this table, therefore you do this. Actually, I really struggle with number, but I absolutely shine at shape and measure.
Right. Yeah, that's so true, isn't it? That you can have different
But
strengths in maths in itself. Yeah.
actually, I really struggle with the concept of division. A little girl at the moment really struggles with division as a concept. She's actually pretty good at adding and subtracting.
Mm.
Her problem is about as soon as we put them, mix up language, we have worded problems. She
Yeah.
did actually say to me yesterday, I was like, wow, but when you put words into maths, you're tricking me because you're making it an English lesson.
Yeah, that's so true. What are we testing them? Are we testing their ability to
Yeah.
read? Yeah.
And actually, I can do maths if you just give me calculations. And she's absolutely, but she can't. When you add the words, it confuses her twice.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It stops being maths as she's concerned. The difficulty is understanding the English.
Yeah. Gosh. Yeah. So not limiting kids is really important as well then. Yeah.
And then we've got to go away next. I'm back in school next week. She and I need to have a think about what we do about language and maths lessons.
Yeah, definitely. So why is inclusion so important? Why did you decide to write this book then? Why is it so important to you? And why is it important in general? Why is inclusion so important?
I think I've always had I'm going to I'm a liberal Jew. My religious faith, this is when you don't expect it to go. My religious faith has always been about social justice, equality, going back to that list of women educators.
Yeah.
Number one of them is Rabbi Julia Neuberger, who was my rabbi when I was 9 and showed me, taught me, demonstrated to me that because I was a woman, there was nothing that didn't stop me doing something. She was the first woman rabbi with her own congregation in the United Kingdom. So, what a role model. And it's about those justice for all and people being seen as people. It's that difference between equality, giving everybody the same, and equity, where we're giving people what they need. And so that sort of part of it. Another step was when I got a job with the title Head of Inclusion. And again, my mother, I said, well, what is a head of inclusion? And I explained that I was leading on special needs and children, Gypsy Roma Traveller. We had a big Gypsy Roma Traveller population in school, children with English as an additional language, children who had open to social care, all these different groups. You're not a head of inclusion, you're a head of preventing exclusion.
I love that.
And I thought, you wouldn't have figured it on a lanyard easily, but what a much better title. And that, I think, it's part of actually why I went into teaching, is because I believe passionately in the value and importance of a child and providing them with the right support for them to be able to meet their potential and be the best them they can. They're not all going to be the same, but we need to give them the right support. And part of that is an opportunity to be engaged and involved in learning and for as many children as possible within a mainstream setting. I'm not against special schools.
Mm-hmm.
I think they have some children that is the right placement. And one of the things is providing children with the best place they can learn.
Brilliant. So in terms of a classroom then, what are the key things that teachers are listening if they're thinking, right, okay, gosh, I want to make my classroom, I don't think is being inclusive enough, or they're thinking, how can I improve? And they've been inspired. What can they do tomorrow when they go into their classroom especially things that are easy to implement and budget friendly. What can they do to make their classroom more inclusive?
I think, one of the reasons we talk about 5 phases of the lesson,
Yeah.
start at the beginning. It's a marathon, not a sprint. You're not going to change everything overnight. You need that culture of inclusion.
Yeah.
But that takes time to build.
Yeah.
I think you start at the beginning of the lesson. Start to come in through the door. That meeting and greeting.
Yes.
Contact with every child as they come into the room. How, just saying hello, making eye contact if that's how they want to make contact.
Yes.
Is making assessment. Where is this child today? Are they ready to learn? Setting up clear expectations. I talk about consistency imbued with flexibility. Children need to know what's happening, but we also need to be flexible to allow for individuals.
Yes.
One size fits. So I think absolute key thing, if you're going to make the more you can make visual, the better. Mm-hmm. How often will we list to children a list of instructions? I need you to do this, 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 and this. Well, I mean, it always, fascinating to me. You get the speech and language report. This child needs to work on using 1 and 2 information word carrying instructions, and the teacher then proceeds to give them 5. Why they can't do it?
Absolutely.
Make it visual. Write it down. What we want them to do. You've got your regular instructions. I need you to get out your pencil, get your book, write the date. Put it on the board. Have a little visual for each of those so the children know what they're doing. Get them to count them off on their fingers. I want you to do these 4 things. Have you done 4 things? Great. Now we can do the next step. How many of us, we need the list. If we go to the supermarket without a shopping list, I know I may be talking, maybe people out there who can do it.
I can't.
Without a list, I come back with rubbish, and I still don't have any toilet roll.
I'm the same, absolutely. Especially if I go to Aldi or Lidl in the middle aisle, then I've come back with loads of stuff from middle aisle, like slippers, hot water bottles, the lot, but none of the actual stuff that I needed to cook.
Exactly, and I think but we make this. So it's putting in those real basics and accepting that for different children it needs to be different.
Yeah, and it's starting them off on, they're not on the back foot when they start the lesson, then are they? Because if they forget the instructions, they find it difficult to remember how to get themselves organised and what those things are. They're already behind, aren't they? Before the lesson's even started, they're already flustered and already not at the same level as their peers.
And I would say one of the other things that goes with that is think about what is the learning and what is the admin.
Yes.
How often do we ask children to write the date, a learning intention, a title, this, that, and the other? And if you're struggling with your learning, how often is that all they do? And
I
so
remember.
Actually, do we need to do that bit?
No, I remember when I was at school having a design and technology teacher, and for some reason, every single lesson we had to draw the border on this piece of paper. No matter what, we had to draw a border. And it was the rule. And to this day, I have no idea why this border needed to be on there, but it had to. But I used to find it quite stressful getting my ruler straight and getting it all neat and wanting it to be perfect. And there was literally no point to it, Sarah. I have no idea why I did it.
But also, nothing. But there will be some children for whom they never got to the learning because they spent their time on the border.
Yeah, I was one of them probably, because I wanted to make sure it looked beautiful and that I was doing the right thing. That used to cause a bit of stress for me at the start of the lesson, which was completely unnecessary stress because it wasn't to do with the learning.
And it goes on with things like I think the classic one is always when people teaching graphs. What is the purpose of the graph lesson? Is it to draw a graph? Is it to put data on a graph, or is it to interpret the data? So if it's to draw the graph, get the child to draw the graph. But if it's to put data on, they don't need to draw the graph.
No.
If it's to interpret the data, they don't need to. But some children will never, ever learn to put the data on or interpret it because they never get to finish drawing the graph.
To that part, yeah. They were always just drawing the X and Y axes, and that's where they're getting up to, yeah.
and trying to get the numbers on the lines, and that's it. And it's those kind of tweaks, making sure, and and also remembering. I mean, I'm going to talk more about TAs in a bit, I hope.
Yes.
But remembering that differentiation is not adult support; they're not the same things, and that children need to be prompted for independence, not made to be prompt dependent.
I like that. That's a good phrase, a good quote there, Sarah.
Yeah, it's a tagline. You can tell.
Sounds very good. So in terms of the whole school then, so we talked about a classroom, and I know your book is about the inclusive classroom, but if we're talking about a whole school and making a whole school more inclusive, so we have head teachers listening, for example, and Senko's listening, how can they make their school more inclusive in general and change the sort of ethos?
I think you can have an inclusive classroom, but you can't have. It's very difficult to have an inclusive classroom in a school that is not inclusive.
Yes,
because you can't. Teachers do create the culture in their classroom, but it's got to be part of the culture in the school. It isn't, then you don't end up with a happy school or happy teacher.
Yeah,
and then you don't have happy children because there's a disconnect between what's happening in one place and the wider place.
Yeah.
Somebody else comes in, they don't. It's got to be a culture. It's got to be that recognition that it cannot be a one size fits all. Not all the children in the school are the same, and that you need to recognise the children's needs. You can't just depend on a diagnosis because the diagnoses are too broad. Autism, it's a bit like saying bird. Well, if we have bird, we know birds fly. Not if you're a penguin.
Or a chicken.
Or a chicken, or an ostrich. Okay, so I'm going to have all my birds that don't fly together. A penguin and ostrich are not really going to be either fly, but they have very different needs if you're going to try. I'm not necessarily suggesting teaching them to read, but if you were, very different needs. And even within your group of penguins, how many people learn penguins? They live in cold places, not South African penguins.
Oh yeah, don't forget those.
So, those labels give us broad directions. All our birds have feathers, but they don't necessarily tell us about the needs of the individual child or bird. I would stop talking about birds in the forest.
I've got images of looking after penguins and chickens and all of this now in my head.
But we can see there that it's different needs. But so often in schools we say they are year 4. Therefore, they will all do what year 4 or year 9 do, and it's a one size fits all. But we've got people, and we wouldn't, we wouldn't expect all adults to be the same. So why do we expect all children to be the same?
Yeah.
And also, there's so often a culture where we make expectations of what good learning looks like based on a neurotypical child.
Completely, I agree.
And that effectively hinders, inhibits, and often actually excludes other children. So we need to be flexible, and it's thinking about how we set up our rooms, the language we use. Not saying it's a one size fits all. You will all make eye contact with the teacher. Gosh. Actually, a lot of us will learn better if we don't make eye contact.
Yeah, it can be physically painful for some.
And a child who is then spending all their time thinking, I need to make eye contact.
Yeah.
They're not going to listen. I mean, it always amuses me when I speak at conferences and things. Good listening and good sitting. And don't fiddle. Watch the adults in conferences. They've got their pencils, they're chewing. There's the one who sits surreptitiously playing with their phone. Kind of prefer they didn't do that. And all these things, they're fiddling with their hair, they're fiddling with their sleeves, they're checking what's in their pocket. And we allow adults to do that.
Yeah.
but we make a rule children can't.
It's almost like we've got higher expectations of children than we have of ourselves, isn't it, Sarah?
And that's because it makes it easier to teach.
Yeah.
Because that's about the needs of the teacher, not the needs of the children.
That's a very, very good point. It is. It's the needs of the teacher and the management of the classroom, isn't it? Rather than thinking of the individual children and what's best for them. And there'll be a lot of children who are masking as a result as well, aren't they? Like autistic children, children with ADHD, etc., who may be masking and learning to mask, which can be then damaging for them later on or at the time. So, gosh, yeah, hugely important to think about the children.
So I think that's what I think. I think you were saying about how SLT is looking at that, and it's not saying every single child needs their own set of rules. You do need that consistency. You do need those boundaries, but they need to be imbued with flexibility and underline. Is that a word? Underline with them needs to be a sense of empathy and a willingness to. And I think one of the other things really important for SLT is to remember children do not come in to our schools a blank sheet.
Yes.
And our children will be highly influenced by what has happened on the way to school, what is going on in their outside lives. And when a child is told off because they haven't got a pencil, and actually there is no money at home, they've got dressed in the dark and the cold because the electric's off, they haven't had breakfast, their shoes don't fit, they're worried about domestic abuse, they're worried about whatever, and then you say to them, you haven't got a pencil.
Yeah, I know.
In fact, they fly off the handle, frankly, or go into withdraw. Is that the big deal?
Absolutely.
Our school, give them a pencil. Don't make a fuss about it. Don't make a song and dance. Give them something to write with.
Yeah. No, I think that's.
And don't penalise.
Yeah, I was talking a podcast episode that will have recently come out when we've got this one out, was with the Thrive approach and talking about like trauma sensitive approaches, and it was again that's what we were talking about, the idea that you've got to remember that kids might have come, like you say, to school and they're hungry, and they might not be behaving because, especially now, unfortunately, and I can't believe we're saying it now, but there are lots of children coming to school now who haven't had breakfast or haven't got a warm house, and you've got to come from a place of understanding that these children can't be expected to learn how you want them to when they haven't got their basic needs met.
And we need to go back to Maslow's hierarchy. We can't get those basic needs. If you don't get those basic needs met, we can't move up that.
No.
And it's absolutely key that, and all the main all these worries and things. It becomes. I don't say all behaviour is communication, but the vast majority of it is.
Yeah.
And we need to listen, and we need to ask the right questions. And I always take them back to a story a colleague told me about a little boy who'd climbed up on the roof of the school, and they got him down, and everybody's screaming and shouting, how do you? Somebody stopped and calmed him down and said, "Why did you go on the roof?" He said, "I was." And he pulled out of his pocket loads of spoons.
Oh.
And everybody went, "Where did they come? They were on the roof." And slowly the child managed to explain. The person he really related to in the school was in the kitchen, because she gave him food and he liked food. And he had gone the previous day and he'd got his pudding and there hadn't been a spoon, and he'd asked for a spoon. And she said, "Well, we're running out of spoons, but people take them outside and throw them up on the roof."
Oh, bless him.
So he'd gone up on the roof to get the spoons back down for her.
Oh.
So yes, he'd done something he shouldn't. Yes, he'd done something that was dangerous. But in his world, he was doing a good thing.
He'd done it from a place of love, almost, hadn't he? A place of wanting to be kind to somebody. Yeah.
And it's about asking the right questions.
Yeah, finding out the reasons behind it. Absolutely. And we know that teaching assistants are very good often at doing this. They're very good at supporting children and teachers as well. And your next book, which has just come out, is called Working Effectively with Your Teaching Assistant or TA. Can you tell us about this book?
aimed at primary. So at least two of the people who did the pre-reading are secondary and gone, this works. Please, just because you're secondary, don't get put off buying it. Sales pitch.
Gotta be done.
But what it is, it almost is kind of be what it says on the tin.
Yeah.
How to work effectively. When Daniel and I were the inclusive classroom, we only had so many words of Bloom's we would take on board in a book. Mm-hmm. And I felt there was an elephant in the room that was never mentioned, which was TAs. Because so often inclusion and differentiation is seen as related to adults. Mm. And for so many parents, teachers, school leaders, and EHCP is seen as synonymous with adults. And the default model for children with EHCPs is about adult support. And we've got a huge amount of really excellent, really academic, really good work from the MITRE project and increasingly from Education Endowment about working with TAs. Mm-hmm. But the vast majority of that is focused at school leaders.
Yeah.
There are a lot of books on how to be a good TA. And there's an absolute gap because the main people working with the TAs are teachers, and there's nothing for teachers. Mm-hmm. And particularly I feel for early career teachers, you have this person who's in your classroom, if you're lucky, who you're supposed to be directing and organising. There's no guidance. Yeah. 4 or 5 sentences in the DFE guidance, most of which say basically work with them. Nothing about how.
Yeah, gosh, I remember it. You're giving me memories there of being a new teacher and having a teaching assistant. And not quite often they're older than you as well, because you're a new teacher and there's that sort of awkward dynamic that you don't want to boss somebody or feel that you can like ask somebody to do something when it feels like they're more experienced than you and they have more knowledge of the children and more understanding of everything than you, and it feels the wrong way around. I remember finding it incredibly awkward and difficult and not having any guidance of how best to do it.
Well, that's what I'm aiming to do.
Yeah, so I should have had your book.
That's what the book is aiming to do. So it's really it's about going through. So we start with some of the challenges of working together, and not actually the fault of the TA or the teacher, often school leaders, just because of the way the roles evolve. I look at working with throughout the lesson about the key things you can do for the different in differentiation, making your classroom inclusive. Talk about behaviour, talk about working with parents, and fundamentally talk about how to share planning.
Yes.
And make structures and quick ways of sharing planning effectively. Because too often, we've got this person and none of us work on our best when we're winging it. No. PAs are asked across the country to wing it day after day after day. They become expert at it. Actually, so often they're getting the teaching, the learning at the same time as the children. Mm. And then they're being asked to personalise it, differentiate it for a child, and they're only picking it up often at the same point. They don't know what they're doing before they get in the room. And how do we make the sharing and planning effective, manageable?
Yeah, I used to find this really difficult at Senko, trying to talk to other teachers about how to organise the planning with their teaching assistant, because you've got difficulties in the sense that the teaching assistants as well, you don't want to ask them to stay behind. You don't have any time as a teacher. You don't want to ask them to stay behind because you know that they're not being paid very well and their time is very precious. So you feel awkward in asking them to stay behind, but you need that time with them to then help so they know what they're doing and to get the most out of them. And it's a really difficult one to tread, isn't it?
Yeah. And so one of the things I do is I get it down to 3 questions.
Mm-hmm.
What's the key learning? What's the key vocabulary the children need to access the learning? And what is the outcome you want?
Yeah.
Those three questions, and it should fit on a post-it.
Brilliant. Yeah, because the other danger, and I remember doing it myself, is then going over the top and sending too much to the teaching assistant, and they haven't got time to actually go through it, being like, this is my lesson plan, these are all the resources, this is what we're doing. And then it being like, well, that's great, Georgina, but we don't have time to look at that. And that's fair enough.
And also thinking about feedback. I mean, it is issue of time. And one of the things I really recommend is setting up a classroom contract to actually talk through your day.
Yeah.
What is it you want? Who's going to do what?
Yeah.
And, but it's about setting up some guidance and some structure for teachers to work with TAs. And I just said, I'm also in the bizarre position of having written a book using a job title I don't really like.
Say like the teaching assistant as the title. No, I agree with you on this one.
I really don't like teaching assistant as a job title. I'm sort of lumbered using it because it's in all the guidance and it's the most. But actually, I think it's something like 18 different titles for the people who work in classrooms.
Wow.
And I will say my preferred title is learning support assistant.
Yeah.
That's what their role is supporting learning.
Yeah, they're not our assistants as teachers,
they are not a PA for the teacher.
No, absolutely not.
And it's also that balance of the teaching and the non-teaching roles. And most of these people have up-team roles, so they're also doing a playground duty. They're also in charge of aid, and it's it's about trying to give people some ideas of how to make it workable in the classroom.
Yeah, and so we've spoken of sort of like how we can work effectively with a teaching assistant. The relationship is so important. I always found that, and I have I've worked with so many lovely TAs that I absolutely adored. And really, really enjoyed working, and they were my friends. I really enjoyed working with them, and I think that really helps, doesn't it? But what are the important things in making this teaching assistant relationship work effectively and be beneficial for learning?
I think I keep feeling about the entire book. If I could summarize it, listen and communicate. And I think it's about listening to your TA and communicating, sharing things. And one of the problems we've got is that because there is not enough time to communicate, schools, and there is no money to give TAs more hours to communicate, that we end up falling back and depending on a good relationship, a friendship between the teacher and the TA, compensate from the lack of time to communicate. It means both will be willing to go over and above, and that's appropriate. And I think that relationship does not always work, and we need to be clear. If it's a friendship, that's a real bonus. But actually, what's important is it's an effective working relationship, and that's really important. Because it needs to be an effective working relationship, but also that models for children what that looks like. You're teaching children through how you behave to each.
I hadn't ever thought of that, and that's really interesting. But it's not. They are learning how to interact with somebody else and how to work effectively with somebody else whilst watching you. That's brilliant.
And so it is about making sure that we make that. We have to create that time. So I think that answered your question. I got slightly.
It has. No, it has completely. Let's just talk before we finish then about what you do at the moment. So you set up See Inclusion and Safeguarding. Can you tell us more about this and how people can find out more about it?
Yeah. So I'm a one-woman band. I'm a small company. I work. I have to pay the mortgage, so I will go where people pay me to go. And so I work across the country. I'm based in the southeast, and what I do is I support schools. I go in, I do training, I lead on inset days, I provide training for all sorts of both special needs and safeguarding. I also do quite a lot of work with schools supporting SENCOs when schools are under SENCO'd. They just don't have the SENCO time. They've got new to roll SENCO, or often I've done a lot of work with SENCOs returning from illness, and just supporting them in that role. But and I go in and look at people's provision. I do reviews of, what their SEN provision looks like, and safeguarding reviews. So please, people come and, contact me, and, I will see what, how we can work together. Because what I love going into other schools, I love being able to see what schools are doing, and, seeing some amazing practice and being able to support people to make that even better.
Brilliant. So it's not just training that you do, but you also do reviews. So you help schools look themselves reflectively at their practice and how they can improve. I think that's really good.
Yeah, and that is, is so, because so often there's such good practice going on. Just need to know that they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, and I suppose add some little tweaks and just guide them a little bit onto the path that makes more sense or whatever.
Yeah, and sometimes the other thing which I think is schools. So often our practice in school is based on what we've always done.
Yeah.
And so sometimes when you know that's not actually working, or not working as well as it could do, or not working as well as it could do for all your children, you need somebody like me to come in and go, we just thought of moving that 3 foot to the left.
It's true, isn't it? It's fresh eyes. It's fresh, it's easier to view something when you're not in it, isn't it? And
you just need somebody to go and say, actually, why don't you do that?
Yeah. Sometimes it's easier to take advice from somebody who's not involved as well. I think that's really, really important. So how can people find you, your books and your company?
Well, books are available through the Bloomsbury website, and there may well be a discount code in February. Watch out, looking at obviously all good bookshops on Amazon. There are other places to buy books. I wouldn't necessarily recommend them, but if you buy a book, please come put a review on Amazon.
Absolutely, it makes a huge difference to reviews.
I can be contacted through my website, which is www.cseainclusion.co.uk. Twitter, assuming Twitter is still existing, at C Inclusion. I'm just beginning to dip my toes into Mastodon, and I'm at C Inclusion at mastodon.social, and at LinkedIn as Sara Alston, and Facebook as C Inclusion and Safeguarding.
Fabulous. And I will put the link to your website in the show notes below, so people will be able to find that both on YouTube and on the podcast. So then they'll be able to have a click on there and contact you if they need to, regarding some extra support. Thank you ever so much. You've been a brilliant guest. Really loved chatting to you.
Well, thank you. It's been really nice talking to you. And I'm afraid I could talk for hours about these things.
I feel like I could too. I think we could talk for a long time together on this. What a great guest. I really enjoyed chatting to Sara. Do make sure you have a look at her books and her website. And I've popped some resources that are linked to this episode topic in the show notes below, so do have a look at those as well. And thanks again for listening to Send In the Experts with me, Georgina Durrant. I hope to catch you again next time.